All right. So when I first was thinking about doing this session, I
Oh,
had another, good,
yep, good.
great. Thank you so much. I had kind of another idea of what it would be, and then it evolved into what you're going to see today. So if things come out a little differently than the original description you may have read in advertisements, that's because I think it actually evolved into a better format. So where we're going today is that we really want to look at assessment and how we can tailor our assessment strategies to engage students, especially in times of disruption and remote learning. We want to think about especially how we can use formative feedback techniques and how those might have to change from how they might look in the classroom to how they could look online. With the overall goal today being that I want you to leave this hour having developed a greater comprehension of how assessment can be tailored in these disruptive times to help students learn and also stay engaged, especially when we're going into remote platforms. So the agenda for today, we want to start out by just briefly framing our discussion and clarifying what we mean by assessment, what do we mean by assignments, and how the two can overlap. And our focus for today is really going to be on formative assessment. If you don't really know what formative assessment is, that's fine. I'm going to teach you what it is. So we'll move into the why we do formative assessments and assignments. Why is it important? And from the why, we'll move into the how and how we can do this. What are some actual techniques that we can use to do formative assessments to maintain student engagement, not only in the traditional classroom, but moving to online spaces. And that's where we'll end up. And at that point, I have an experimental activity where I'll try to give y'all the chance to think about how you might transform an assessment to fit an online learning platform. Do we have any questions about where we're going today? All right. Oh, I can't use the arrow keys. I have to do the click. All right, so really quick, let me just clarify the terms assessment and assignment. Have y'all ever been confused by these terms? Let me ask you real quick. Thumbs up for yes. Do you think we know what they are? What's the difference? So when we talk about an assessment, we are talking about the process that we use to gauge a student mastery or progress within a specific set of skills or a body of knowledge. When we talk about an assignment, we are talking about the specific work or task that students do as a way to assess their progress or mastery. Let me give you an example to clarify that. My example is a quiz. I can assign a quiz in the sense that students must complete this quiz as a task, but I can also use that quiz to assess whether learning has actually occurred. Students can also use that quiz as an assessment to see whether they have learned as well. And I can also use, as the instructor, I can use that quiz by looking at the results to assess whether my teaching was effective. Any further questions on the clarification between these two terms? You're going to hear both throughout this webinar. Very good. Okay, so just to further start to frame our discussion as we go into talking more about assessments. When we talk about assessments, we want to think about what type of assessment are students prepping for. And we usually see that there are two types. The first one that I think we are all the most familiar with is summative assessment. These are usually assessments that have a terminating point. For instance, a summative assessment might be like a midterm exam. Students come into the classroom and they take the exam. That's it. It's done. Summative can also be things in addition to midterms. They can be quizzes. They can be final papers and excuse me, and things of that sort. We are not going to be focusing on summative assessments for today. We're going to be looking at formative. And the way I like to explain formative to people is through the use of a metaphor. Let's imagine, and this will pick us all up in this quarantine. Let's imagine we're about to go take a road trip from wherever you are right now on this map to San Diego. And let's say on this road trip, we're planning pit stops along the way. We're doing these pit stops because we want to stop and check in, see how we're doing. We want to see if we need to stretch our legs. We want to see how our passengers are doing, see if anyone needs to take a break, and so on and so forth. And that's what we mean by formative assessment, that over the 16-week journey of a course, that whole long road trip, you have checkpoints to check in and see how your students are doing. So if that's not clear yet, I'm going to give you the chance to craft your own formative assessment definition in just a second. But just to foreshadow where we are going, we want to start thinking about, why is this important? Especially now that we've all been dispersed into these random geographical locations, into these little cubbyhole boxes we call rooms. Why is it important that we still maintain this sense of formative assessment among our students? And finally, why is it important that we think about formative assessment as something like a roadmap? Why is it important that our students know where we are going? Why is it important that we bother to keep their engagement in these times of disruption? So without further ado, go ahead. You can write this down, or you can just think about it. Try to write down a definition of formative assessment. I gave you a description of it using a metaphor, but go ahead and craft your own. And then try to write down 2 to 3 reasons why you might think it is important, or just think about it, whatever you prefer. And I'll give you just about 1 minute. About 30 seconds. All right, I know that's not a lot of time, but is anyone brave enough to want to share something that they wrote, whether a definition or why it's important? You don't have to, but you're welcome to.
Is to keep engaged in the subject and gain knowledge.
Absolutely. Very good. Anyone else want to?
To make adjustments.
Absolutely. So yeah, we're already seeing 2 important things: keep engagement and also make adjustments on our end as the teacher. Let's check. So here's my reveal slide. Go ahead and look at this definition. Here's a more technical one. Formative assessment as methods to gauge students' level of knowledge or skills. How did your definitions compare? Just think about it. And then go on ahead and take a look at the reasons I have listed very briefly before I talk about them. Did yours that you thought about, did any overlap? Just take a look for a second. So when we do formative assessment, it's very important, especially as we've moved into the online sphere, because it does create milestones for learners to gauge their progress over the course of a class. It lets them know how they are doing, and when students know how they are doing, where they are, when they know what they need to work on, they become more engaged. And that's especially important when we are all scattered out in time and space, and things like courses, classwork, assignments become even less concrete than they are, let's say, in the traditional classroom setting. And also, when we do these formative check-ins, we reduce the tendency of students to want to panic cheat, because the way we want to do formative assessment is to build confidence, is to build skill through constructive feedback that is actionable and allows learners to develop their abilities and skills. This also gives students a better realization of how they learn. And it also, as Jonathan said, it helps us make adjustments. It helps the teacher determine, how is my crew doing? Do I need to change my focus? Is my teaching effective? If I have a whole bunch of students and I see they're just staring at me, how do I know they've actually just comprehended what I've said? How do I know they just understood everything? And that is why we do these formative check-ins, so we can better help students and catch issues early on. And this is important, especially in the online setting, whether we're talking about synchronous classes or asynchronous. Especially with asynchronous classes, we want to find who's struggling early on. We already have a more distant platform, but it gets even more distant in terms of needing to reach out to students. It takes longer. It's not the classroom where we can just pull a student aside and give them feedback on their performance. It becomes something much more time consuming. And that's why it's very important to check early on the progress that students are making. Any questions about what is formative assessment at this point, or why it's important? Yes.
So this is a comment. Although you could say it's a question, what I'm picking up from you is that formative assessments are more for the teacher in order to help them help the student learn. Is what I'm picking up from what you're saying. It's not that it can't help the student, but the student is not. It doesn't sound like the student is being really graded on these formative assessments. They're being graded on the other type of assessment, the take-home quiz or the midterm exam or the paper.
You just hit on it. Great point, John. So yes, what you have essentially just said is the point that we usually make when we talk about formative assessment. Formative assessments usually are not graded. They are very, very low stakes at the most. They are safe fails. But while it does help the teacher to gauge the student, they can also help the student to gauge the student themselves. For instance, What if I have a quiz? And this is probably foreshadowing where we're going. But instead of assigning that quiz for a grade, I have students take quizzes to see where their knowledge base lies. If I assign a quiz and I say, I'm not grading this, this is for you to see what you know and what you don't, then in that manner, formative assessment lets the student assess themselves. It lets them know, hey, I'm very strong in this area. I didn't know this area. This is where I need to improve. So it can go both ways.
Sarah, can I ask a question? Sorry, I didn't find
Absolutely.
a function of raising hand on my here.
Oh, that's okay. Just come on in.
Sorry. So I understand the interaction between teacher and a student. I just wonder, does it actually also involve peer-to-peer, like student to student, as you said?
Absolutely.
Because in that case, like, for example, I'm weaker, like something I really don't know compared to my peers, does it actually, makes me feel even worse and not even confident?
Absolutely. And Virginia, the thing you're touching on, actually, we do a separate, when we do our full workshop, we talk about constructive feedback. But what we've actually touched on here is that formative feedback can go three ways. It can go between teacher and student to self, and peer to student. So, and the way that works is, for instance, you can give a draft of, let's say you've written 5 pages of your midterm paper. You come in and you switch 5 pages with the person next to you. Your peer can give you feedback on your work, and you can give them feedback on their work. So yes, absolutely, in that sense, it should be a safe fail if done correctly. And you should use your peers not only to give you feedback, but to help you grow as well. Does that get at the essence of your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. So let me go on ahead and ground this in some learning theory, because it's great to sit here and talk about why this is important, but let's go on ahead and look at this idea by Carol Dweck, and of course many others. She had this idea that people can either view intelligence as something that is fixed or is able to grow. And this is where she developed the idea of the fixed versus growth mindsets. So when we're talking about formative feedback, within this context of the fixed and growth mindset, we are saying that when done correctly, formative feedback can give students the safety to think that intelligence is not fixed and they can grow progressively. What I mean by that is, if I walk in to a math class and I already sit here and think I'm no good at math, I've already fixed my mindset that I'm probably not going to do very well in this course because I'm not good at math. But if I walk in to this math class and let's say the teacher uses formative checkpoints, let's say she has regular math quizzes that are no stakes. If I completely bomb it, it's only for me to say I need help and I need work on this area. Then these formative checkpoints can allow this fixed mindset to slowly start to develop through process and progress and learning that they can actually do math. And that's where this idea of duet came in. Formative checkpoints are to help us see that feedback is something that is useful and constructive and can allow us to develop and maintain engagement rather than disengagement with the course. Do we have any questions so far? You want to see some ways we can do this? I think you do. So now we talked about why formative feedback. Now we're getting into the how. Here's how we do it. And we alluded to this before. We see that there are traditional examples of ways that assessment occurs. These are often summative, but I believe it was John earlier, when done in different ways, such things as quizzes, exams, and papers can act as formative. Maybe you have an exam, especially in this day and age where we're remote, maybe it's not graded heavily. Maybe you just use the exam for students to see where they are in the course, or maybe they can go in and take it multiple times until they get the right answer. Maybe papers are split up. You ask for drafts, you do peer review. So in that sense, while traditional examples that we're most familiar with can often be summative, they can also act as formative in certain circumstances. Now, go on ahead and take a look at the additional methods I listed. These are usually all strictly formative. Short reflections, small group discussions, concept maps, poll everywhere, peer feedback. Has anyone familiar with those? Sort of, kind of.
What's a concept map? Is that like linking ideas with each other?
Absolutely. So a concept map is essentially something like this. And please pardon my artistic skills at the moment. It's essentially, it's mapping ideas and how they connect.
Oh.
So Sarah, like sometimes we call like a logic map. That's the same thing, right?
I would think so, yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Yes,
Thank you.
yes. So what I want to do, let me check the time. I want you, do you see on the right side of the screen, we have a tiny link. If you are able, I would love to take a minute and just see if you have any other ideas. And if you would like, please feel free to add them to that shared Google Doc right there. Because our goal here is we want to develop even more methods. And I'll add these to the slides after this. And I want to draw on your ideas. What are some formative assessments that we could use to add to this list? So feel free to take a few seconds and add them to the Google Doc if you like, or you can type them in chat. But try to come up with one.
Oh, role play. Virginia says role play.
Role play, I'll add that. Absolutely. Oh, that's a good one.
Mm.
Is it difficult to think of?
Practical. Oops. How about
So let me ask a question.
Sure.
What about part of a class instead of the regular teacher? So take 5 minutes and you teach the class on a specific point. How would you describe that? Is that would that fall into this? I'm getting confused between summative, the two terms here, but would you consider that formative? I would consider that very formative for the student to teach the class for 5 minutes or 10 minutes.
I would too. And the way I would break up the two is I would ask this question. Is having the student teach the class for 5 to 10 minutes, is there a heavy grade attached to it?
Well, there could or couldn't be. I mean,
Right.
it's all depending really on how it's weighted, usually by the teacher.
Absolutely. And therein's your difference.
But a lot of times, in some of my classes, there's been something like that. And it's not clear whether they're being weighted at all or used to grade you. I think in some cases, it's as long as you do it, you show up and you teach the class for, if you want to call it that, or lead discussion for a short period of time, then you passed, right? You did it. So I don't know whether, you know, it's formative regardless of whether you get a grade for it or not, in the sense that it's helping you learn the material, and it's also seeing whether you've learned it yourself.
I think that's correct. And the other aspect that you're getting to there, in terms of it being murky, of how is this being assessed, that is actually, and we'll go on ahead and get on into it, that part of that is what we call part of transparent design. That is actually partially a fault on the instructor for not being specific in what they are looking for or how they are assessing it. So it gets a little different than just what kind of assessment it is. And it actually gets into that the instructor does need to be clearer on their expectations.
Virginia says that approach might work better for certain topics than others.
Absolutely. Yes. Not everything is a one size fits all. Different assessment strategies will work differently for different groups and for different topics as well. Speaking of that, y'all are getting to where I'm going. I love it. So just really quick, you'll see on this slide, we have a Google Doc link. This is also linked in the session resources at the end of the slides. This is a document PFF put together with a whole bunch of assessment strategies just devoted to online learning. So please, after this webinar, please feel free to read through that and let us know if you have questions on that. Just be aware that that source is there. So go on ahead and just for 30 seconds, consider this question, because now we want to move into the online space exactly. How do we keep student engagement when remote teaching, especially with the way we design assessments for online learning? Just think about it for a few seconds. Let's go ahead, because I'm actually going to give y'all the chance to try to tackle this. But before I do that, before I cut you loose, you'll notice there's a word in the title of the slide that's a little bigger than everything else, and that's relevancy. One answer I'm going to provide to that question that we just pondered for a few seconds is in making assessments relevant to students, especially in the online space. And this is, so what you're seeing on the slide is a very abbreviated version of something that we call transparent design. Essentially, in transparent design, the assessment or assignment should be clear in its goal and its purpose. Why are you having students complete this assignment? Is it connected to the class? Is it because you want them to analyze a certain problem? Maybe the goal is that you want them to look how rhetoric in news media influences public perception of X subject. I think every assignment and every assessment should have a goal and purpose and should be intentional. Again, you also need to consider your audience though. And this is where the shift is changing right now. This is where we are seeing this disruptive time. What are student needs? In the classroom, when students come in, we need to think about, who am I talking to? And it might be as simple as, am I talking to majors? Am I talking to non-majors? Are these people in a senior seminar class specializing in this field? Are they taking this as an elective? What do those students need? If I have an audience where I go, okay, these people they need to knock out an elective. In my assignments then, I want to consider what they'll need not only for the classroom and their future classes, but maybe skills that can help them as they go out the door back into the real world. So maybe I'll craft assignments that have writing in them because I want them to hone their writing skills. Do students have the ability to do this assignment? Let's say I want them to write a paper in class. My goal of this paper is to have them analyze the way rhetoric is being used in mass media for X subject. My students need to develop writing skills so they can be successful in their future courses, as well as bring good writing skills to their future job positions. Now, let's say they have this paper due. All of a sudden, we're remote. And I was going to have this paper turned in on the last day of class. Bring it in person, print it out, hand it to me. Now I have to go back and think about, as I'm transitioning to this online space, how are they going to get these papers to me? How do I know that they all have access to a computer? How do I know that they can email this to me? How do I know they have a printer that they can even print it out, put it in an envelope and mail it to me? Do they have a mailbox that they can put this in? Or is this something they'd have to go to the post office for? So the point I'm getting at up into access here is, when we're generally talking about traditional in-classroom models, you would consider these as well. But I'm also starting to point out that in times of disruption like this, there is a shift in the way that we have to do things. All of a sudden, that paper may not work. And going into my last point here, what counts as successful completion for the task? In other words, a criteria for success. So in an ideal world, hey, I have a clear goal. I know what my audience needs to do on this paper. They all have access to do it right and turn it in. And let's say I make a nice rubric and I tell them everything that I am grading for. And I say, here's your rubric. This is what your grade will be based on. Now, when we move into this time of disruption, I have to go back and evaluate what a successful paper is going to look like. Maybe I need to offer an alternative to that assignment. Maybe I have to adjust and simplify what I'm looking for. So the point I'm building up to here is, while you need to be clear in your assignment goals and assessment goals, there are also times like these where we have to start thinking about tailoring our assessments to specific situations. And this is where I want to give you a chance to do just that. So how do these change when students are remote in cyberspace versus a traditional classroom setting? And what I want you to do, we're just going to spend a few minutes on this. I want you each to think of an assessment strategy. You can for sure use one that we went over or choose a new one. and think about how it might look in the traditional classroom versus how it might look now in cyberspace. Let me give you a little more scaffolding. In other words, how might you have to change X strategy from its traditional classroom use to better suit an online space? And then here are some guiding questions. Let's say I need to change classroom quizzes. Maybe a system like Canvas could help me. Maybe I could use those quizzes to be moved online and taken through there. Does grading have to change? How might you have to restructure the assignment? Any questions on this? This might be a little challenging. Oh, John, you're muted.
It would help if we had a specific assignment in the context of a regular face-to-face classroom, and then sudden what happened now has happened, and we've got to rethink that maybe assignment a little.
That's a good way to do it as well. But for now, I want you to try to choose one yourself.
Well, can I think out loud, or am I don't want to keep people from working on this, but say a paper is a paper, whether it's done online or not. You typically, we CGU turn our papers in through email anyway. So it may not affect the paper itself. The question might be the student's interaction with the teacher in preparing that paper. That could change the situation for the student.
But then see, I toss the ball back and say, would it affect the paper itself? They can't go to the library. Is everything online via databases? Do they have access to databases online? Are they at a home with internet?
Well, that would affect the paper if you couldn't get certain resources. And again, that changes with the library from pick out books. Yesterday, I was online with somebody from the library because I was looking for a book, and the library had it, but they didn't want me to get it, right? Because now we can't even pick up books at the library, and they don't want to send them out either. So they were looking where, you can possibly get access to this book.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then I would also toss the next question out there would be, so how might you have to change that assignment? How might that paper have to change? And that's hard to answer. Yeah.
It all depends on the level of difficulty you have finding your resources that you're using for writing that paper.
Absolutely.
You may be able to get them through, because they're offered through the library online, but then certain books may not be.
Absolutely.
And then you might have to look still online. Got mine. The girl I was working with, she said the Internet Archive has it. So the Internet Archive is a big online library. So they happen to have the book so that you could borrow the book for 2 weeks.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we can push even further with that and saying that's assuming that the person still has internet access. What if it's someone who doesn't have internet access at home but was relying on going to Starbucks for free Wi-Fi?
Well, that definitely creates a problem for them. They're going to have to get internet service at home. Otherwise, they're going to probably end up having to delay finishing the class.
Or do you change the assignment? Or maybe you offer them an alternative assignment.
Right. So that would cause you as a teacher to have to think through their own situation, the course material, because you don't want to give them any assignment. You still want it relevant to the course material.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You want it relevant to the course material, but what we can do is we can be agile in the way we assess. So let's say the paper is not working. Maybe an alternative assignment here would be, ooh, this is even challenging for me, I will admit. Maybe I can have them, maybe they can draw a concept map and link all the ideas together and annotate why they linked all these ideas together based on the notes that they do have and any available resources that they do have from the course. Maybe that's one way. Again, this is difficult. And this just goes to show us it's not always clear cut. Would anyone else like to also offer another assessment or ways that it might have to change or build on what we're talking about?
I'm wondering about math teachers that are giving math exams.
How would you do a math exam in remote learning? What if you have students who are homeless? Homelessness is an issue in undergraduate settings.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
And especially even now with the COVID-19, homeless students that were relying on the library to do things online.
Yeah. And again, so the whole point here is that in times of disruption, the traditional models sometimes need to be rethought. And there just has to be an increased level of agility and an openness to perhaps even simplify what you want students to learn. In other words, we can make a class much more complicated and complex in terms of what we want students to learn when we go into the classroom. But when we move into the online space, sometimes we just have to deduce down to the absolute nitty-gritty, just those key points that we want students to take away and focus on the absolute bare bones. Any other questions?
Sarah, can I share something?
Absolutely.
Well, I just read the news. I'm not really sure how true it is. It's about K-12, like a kid's, I think, primary school or something, or junior school. And then it was also about math class. That's why I thought about it. And then the kid kind of understand, like the teacher was trying to draw online, but it's just kind of hard when you have those formulas and stuff. So the teacher drive out to the student's home, and then she was writing it on the board, like in front of, they have a door closed, so she was outside, and then she was showing the student how to do it on board, and the student was like making the note inside her room, and then they were kind of like thinking. I think it makes a difference when you have it online to show it, to write it on the board, like virtually, then you do it offline there.
Yes.
Especially for math.
I wonder if the teacher could record a video and send it out to the students, even via text message.
But then for me, it's like, maybe because I'm not a math person, like when you watch a video, even if you can stop it in the middle, when you're just stuck there sometimes, you just don't know.
Absolutely. And there's there are some things where the answer, you just don't know. Like you said, Virginia.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's a big drop point when we do it online.
Yes, absolutely. So just for the sake of time, I don't want to keep us late. Let's go on ahead and start to synthesize and discuss what we've talked about in the last hour. And I know I can barely just scratch the surface right now in this. Please stay tuned for PFF workshops in the fall. No. Sorry, advertisement, no. What questions could you imagine students would ask regarding assessment, especially in the online space? So if y'all can just become the students for now, what questions might you have about assessments? What barriers might you encounter as a student working in the online space?
And that's a question for us to answer right now, right?
Yeah, or just think about it. Let's just open this time. If we want to discuss those questions, that's great. But also let's open this time to any other questions that you have, whether it's about formative assessment or any other aspect of what we covered today.
Hi.
Hey.
What about case study approach for application-based courses for students to do an application, to apply the concept to a case study so that they can be able to understand the concepts. And then at the end of the day, it will be done in a group. What about that approach for assessments?
So essentially,
especially for online, where you are not there to reinforce, especially for where you are teaching online, the students just take it as if they are in the classroom. But for you to be able to get them to understand the concept better, or for feedback for their understanding, you use a case study approach. Would that work? Because I've observed that works better for, let's say, technology-based courses.
I'm in religion, so I'm not very familiar with the case study approach, but I would think it would work. Because so essentially, and I don't mean to oversimplify this, but let's say if you're using a case study to have students apply materials to, say, a real life scenario, and you have to do this online, I would think you absolutely could still do that, because maybe the case study could be, what about the pandemic right now? How are students experiencing the pandemic themselves? And then they have to apply this material to their current situation. That's just a brainstorm, because then you've connected it to lived experience. You're still applying the course material that you want them to master. And it also decreases the potential for issues gathering sources, internet access, so on and so forth. What does anyone else think about that in terms of case studies? Anyone else have any input?
Hello.
Sorry.
The case material I'm talking about is the case that will have almost everything in, so that the student will be able to fish out information, and if required, before they go out, to go and search for additional information to support. So let me give a very typical example.
Yes.
So if you are teaching a course on, let's say, decision making in IT, on outsourcing, and you've made the student understand the concepts of the life cycle of outsourcing as an example. and you try to give a case study of an organization that want to outsource, and for the student to go through all the life cycle to be able to apply that knowledge to come out with a document that shows an understanding of the concepts.
Mhm.
That's what I mean.
I completely understand. That's a tricky one, Richard. Essentially, how would you move that to an online platform?
Well, this you could assign this case study and put students in groups and have them collaborate on it over Google Docs. And that would focus them. I think Richard is saying this would help focus students in on the material you've already given them, to have them dig into it to answer this case study question and apply the knowledge they've learned, or focus their online search or the articles they have to review to answer this
That's
case study
right.
problem. Yeah.
Yeah, and you could also so you assign them into groups and they work on, say, Google Docs. You could also assign each individual kind of a piece of what aspect that they should handle, what kind of their area of expertise would be. That minimizes work. And it can also help tailor if someone says, hey, I don't have access to this, this, or that, but I can do this. So assigning roles as well, that could help.
Yeah, we do this a lot in epidemiology. And Richard, are you in IT? Is that
Yes, I'm in IT. Well, I'm expected to be in US with this year. I actually deferred the course,
Yeah,
so I
it
decided
sounds,
to join here.
it's really interesting to hear your case study example, how it would be done in IT.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm actually a lecturer in a public university in Ghana. So that's currently we are in that same situation where we have to teach online. The point that was raised in Ghana, a lot of students are complaining about data bundle, the cost of it, to use it to do assignments, as well as even come online for synchronous teaching. So we have moved some. I was doing that and I have to stop because the students were complaining that they don't have money to buy data bundle for internet access to join online. So we have to give the notes, put discussion boards, and also give assignments that reinforce the concepts.
Bali says he has to leave, but
Oh, okay. Bye, Bob.
good topic in discussion.
Richard, I'm also, you bring up a really good question here. I'm going to write that down as well. And I'm going to do some research and see if I can find any extra sources, because that is a challenging one.
So Richard, you're saying you have to move it to a asynchronous class, like not over Zoom, right?
Yes, that's right.
And so you're having to give like these case studies and comments and stuff like that statically.
Yes.
I wonder if you could videotape yourself, maybe.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
like videotape yourself and then post it on your own website where people can comment.
We decided not to do that.
Okay.
It was a university policy not to do that.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. Don't do that then.
But are you asking for how you can do it, or are you saying that's how you figured out what to do, is by using case studies? Virginia has to leave.
Okay, cool. Bye, Virginia. Yeah, Richard, let me do some research on that for you. That's a challenging situation, I'll admit. So let me make sure. Do you have a CGU student email?
Yes, yes, I have.
Richard.day?
That's right.
All right. Because what I'll do is if I find any sources, I will send them to you.
Okay.
Because that's, oh yeah, that's a challenging. How do you turn case studies into asynchronous? Yeah, let me follow up with you on that one.
Okay.
All right. I don't want to keep you all late. So any last questions as we wrap up here? All right, then anyone? Remember, we have a couple resources available at the end, and you all should be able to download and have access to these slides. If not, again, I am Sarah Eckert. Please reach out to me. I am also the one who controls the PFF email. So if you ever see an email from PFF, it is coming from me as well. You can reach me there too. And thank you for coming today. Hang in there, everyone.
Thank you very much for the presentation.
Oh, you're welcome. Y'all stay safe, all right? Stay healthy and safe.
Yeah.
An excellent presentation today.
Good. And John, I'll reach out to you and we can talk about quals.
Okay.